What can I say? I was blindsided. My wife Maggie had just dropped a big bombshell on me. "Make that 2 big bombshells on me. Mac, we need to talk," she said as I came in from work. She was still dressed in her business suit from where she worked as an accountant. I was dressed in my coveralls from where I worked, overseeing my chocolate business. I'm Angus Mac McDougall, and my wife is Margaret Sullivan McDougall. Yes, she hyphenates her last name. Pretty pretentious if you ask me. But whatever. She goes by Maggie. I'm of Scottish descent, and she's of Irish descent. Of course, that should have been my first clue that we weren't really compatible, but shoot. I was in love with her golden blonde hair and green eyes and awesome body at first sight. We'd met 10 years earlier when I'd just gotten out of the Army and we started college together. She was 18 and I was 22. I was using the GI Bill to get a culinary degree, and she was going for, of course, the aforementioned accounting degree. For some odd reason, we hit it off. It was probably that she was a chocolate connoisseur, and I wanted to make chocolate candy and cookies, and basically anything chocolate, come to think of it. My mom had a thing for chocolate, and so did a lot of women. It was a seller's market, with chocolate always in high demand. While most businesses do most of their sales at Christmas time, chocolatiers can make bank all year round. Christmas, of course, but also Valentine's Day, Easter, Independence Day, etc. Valentine's Day is in a dead heat with Christmas for chocolate demand, and my little chocolate shop factory does better business at Valentine's than Christmas, most years. Oh, and I strongly dislike my first name, Angus. Seriously, Mom? You had to go and name me darn Angus? I introduce myself as Mac to everyone. Nobody calls me Angus, not even my wife. Okay, Mom and Dad call me Angus, but only when they're really mad at me. Every other time, I'm Mac. So Maggie had just told me that we needed to talk. I tensed up immediately, since every guy on earth knows what those 4 words mean when strung together in a sentence. We know it and fear it. "We need to talk" has been the forerunner of breakups and divorces since the dawn of time. So it was with a sense of impending doom that I sat down at the table and looked at her. I knew my world was about to come crumbling down around me. 10 years together. 8 of those happily married. Well, I had been happily married. I had believed the same of Maggie. I thought through the possible reasons for what she was about to say. Money? Not likely. I was making a lot of money per year, close to $250,000 after everything was settled with overhead, payroll for my employees, taxes, etc. We were doing very well here. Our combined income was close to $375K a year. We were not struggling. Lack of love? Not on my part. I loved her with all my heart and soul. Had she fallen out of love with me along the way? Heck, we'd just been talking about starting a family a week ago. She interrupted my thoughts by pushing the dreaded manila envelope across the kitchen table to me as I sat down. "Maggie, please tell me this isn't what I think it is." I looked at her, and her face was unreadable. "I'm sorry, Mac." "Oh," she said softly. "I should have talked to you before, but I want a divorce." "Why?" I asked with more calmness in my voice than I was feeling at that moment. "It's complicated." She hesitated, looking away. "You met someone else." I must have been in shock, since I still hadn't flown into a rage. "Yes," she said even more softly, barely whispering. "How long?" I asked. Gosh, what was wrong with me? I should have been furious, pacing back and forth as I called her everything but a child of God. I should have been threatening the jerk for whom she was leaving me. I should have felt something other than complete numbness. 8 months, she said. I closed my eyes. 8 months, I repeated. You've been seeing someone else for 8 dang months, and the first I hear about it is that you want a divorce. I shrugged. I guess you're going to take a lot of my things in court. Since alienation of affection isn't looked kindly upon here in California, I don't have many options. No, Mac, she said as she shook her head slowly. Your business is yours, not mine. The house is mine by inheritance from my grandparents, but I'll give you a few days to find a new place. After you've found one, of course, I'll be seeking minimal financial support for a while, until I remarry. Nothing extravagant, though, I sighed. Do I know him? I asked after a pause. If you harm him in any way, you'll end up in jail, she said unnecessarily. Not that I didn't want to confront him, but I didn't want to lose my business either. I know that. I think I have a right to know who's been deceiving me for the past 8 months, though. I shrugged. Reginald Pennington, she said, holding her head up straight. Darn, that friends was bombshell too. I hated him already even before this. Okay, now I was dang angry. I closed my eyes and took deep breaths to calm myself. Reginald Jerk Pennington, blonde, blue-eyed, super rich from old money, Hitler's ideal for the master race, you name it. Oh, and ultra snobby with a prejudiced streak a mile wide, too. I had warned Maggie about him after we had dinner with him to discuss some of the charities we were all involved with at the time. She'd dismissed my warning and told me he was harmless. Yeah, right. Harmless like a rattlesnake. We'd met him at a charity event in our community, and even then I didn't like the way he'd been looking at Maggie. He looked at me with disdain and looked at her with pure desire in his eyes. My anger barely under control, I finally managed to look Maggie in the eyes again. Well, I guess there isn't much I can do about it then. I shrugged as nonchalantly as I could. I wish it hadn't come to this, Mac. She smiled sadly, which I knew was an act. She was just trying to ease my pain. I saw through it for what it really was, though. That's not true, Mags, I said evenly. My brain was now working on a plan. But whatever. I won't contest the divorce, as long as it is what you say it is. I'll have my lawyer look over the papers with me before I sign them, you know. She nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less, Mac. Just so you know, it wasn't anything you did or didn't do. Reginald and I just had a deep connection. I still love you, but I'm in love with him. I'm really sorry it has to be this way, Mac. What a bunch of nonsense. She was in love with his money. His family is incredibly rich. The night of the charity ball we'd attended, he danced too close to Maggie, and as they separated, I noticed him adjusting himself after she came back to our table. But since I didn't want to create problems just yet, I just said I'm sorry too. Well, after that conversation, she handed me the manila envelope. You'll be officially served tomorrow morning, Mac. I'll meet you with my lawyer at Tim's office. This is just a preview of what I want from the divorce settlement. She's referring to Tim Grayson, my best friend since grade school, and my lawyer in all legal matters related to my chocolate factory. You know what? Get rid of the financial support, and you have a deal. Reggie is wealthy. You don't need my money, right? I knew it was a long shot, but golly. She owed me that at the very least. She seemed to consider it. Heck, if she went for it, I might not even go forward with the plan that had already semi-formed in my head. No, Mac. I need something out of all of this. After all, I did spend 10 years of my life with you. Oh, heck no. That statement right there, that our entire marriage, indeed our entire time together while dating and engaged, had just been a waste of her time, ignited something in me. I looked at the proposed financial support and raised an eyebrow. She wanted $2,200 a month for 2 years, or until she remarried, whichever came first. That was about half of what I made per month after paying my employees and expenses. I could live on it, and I had more than enough savings. I pretended to think about it. Okay, I guess it will be worth it in the end. I shrugged finally. I'm going to pack now. I'm leaving tonight. And I did. I packed my suitcase and suit bag with my clothes, toiletries, and all that stuff. I also packed my extensive music CD collection that included everything from Marty Robbins to Metallica to Mozart. Yeah, it encompassed all those genres. Heck, I even had some Sir Mix-a-Lot in there just for fun. I loaded it all into Bullet, my 1968 Mustang Fastback 390 GT, and took off. I was gone in less than an hour and called Kat on my cell phone as soon as I was on the road. Hey Mac, what's up? Kat answered on the second ring. Kat, I just got kicked out and I'm going to be served divorce papers in the morning at Tim's office. Maggie is upgrading, at least in her mind. I snorted, the bitterness finally showing through in my voice. Darn, are you kidding me? She sounded as shocked as I felt. Nope, I'll be staying at the Holiday Inn until I can find a place. I replied. Oh heck no, you get yourself over to my place right now, Mr. She was going street on me, as she puts it. Fine. Yes, Ma, I am, I chuckled despite myself. Good. See you when I see you. She ended the call, and I couldn't help but smile and shake my head ruefully. Katrina Monroe is my manager at the chocolate factory. She looks quite a bit like Aisha Tyler, only a bit younger. Just as tall, though. 6 feet of amazingness. We all call her Kat, and she doesn't mind. Her boyfriend, Darius Jackson, plays for the LA Dodgers, which made him cool in my book. He was on a road trip right now for 8 games, and would be back sometime next week. That gave me a few nights at Kat's place in her guest room before he got back. Heck, Darius was cool with me, so I might be able to stay even longer. No, I needed to find my own place. Heck, I could probably buy an affordable house outright with what I had in the bank. But then, the 50-50 split in community property hadn't taken place yet. Darn. Yeah, I'd have to probably rent an apartment for a while before I could afford my own house again. My thoughts were interrupted as I realized that I was close to Kat's place. Her boyfriend only stayed there sometimes, but he kept after Kat to move in with him down in LA. Kat wouldn't budge yet, though. She wanted a full commitment from him first, as in a ring-on-finger commitment. So here I was, 32 years old, still in good shape, already a millionaire, but treated badly by the woman I had fallen in love with and married. My soon-to-be ex-wife, the dishonest gold-digging person. I pulled into Kat's driveway and parked right next to her little Ford Fusion. I swear to goodness, that little car cowered in fear of Bullet. I smirked as I gave Bullet one more burst of the engine before shutting down the big V8. As I opened the trunk and grabbed my suitcase, I saw Kat open the door and walk out in just some casual shorts and tank top. I caught my breath as I took in her full chest, straining at the tank top, her long silky legs, and her gorgeous round behind. I quickly pushed those thoughts from my head, however. I closed the trunk and walked toward her, and Kat let me in without a word. The look on her face was one of disbelief, warring with several other emotions. I'm pretty sure I was still in shock at this point. Yes, I was in shock. It was how I was still functioning. But no sooner had I gotten inside, but I dropped the suitcase and collapsed to my knees. The depths of what had happened finally sank into my shock-addled brain. I had compartmentalized it as long as I could, but now it all came bursting out of my mental compartment and out of my eyes. Great racking sobs shook my body as the tears flowed freely, and I felt two long female arms go around my shoulders as Kat knelt beside me. I clung to her desperately, her presence alone holding me in this world and keeping me from completely withdrawing into myself. Shh, it's okay now. You're going to be fine, Mac, she soothed. No, I won't. I shook my head. Yes, I was wallowing in self-pity. I admit that freely. Her response was to pull my head to her ample chest, and I felt loved at that moment. The love of a very good friend, but at least I felt love from somebody. She drew me to my feet with her and we walked. Okay. She walked and I stumbled into the living room and collapsed on her big leather couch. Hey, we can watch Darius play. Dodgers are playing the Braves tonight in Atlanta. She was trying to cheer me up, and she knows how much I love baseball. I sniffled like a kid. Okay, I guess it couldn't hurt. I tried to smile, but I think it ended up as more of a grimace. She turned on the TV and the game was in the fourth inning in Atlanta. The score was already 4-2, Dodgers. That actually did cheer me up and took my mind off of my own woes. Kat got us both a cola, and we watched the game together. It went back and forth for a while, but we ended up winning in extra innings. By the end, we were laughing and cheering as Darius caught the fly ball to end the game and secure another great Dodgers victory. I was taking a big sip of the local microbrew when all of a sudden Kat's laughter stopped. You have got to be kidding me, she exclaimed loudly, her mouth open in shock as she glared at the TV. I followed her gaze and saw Darius hugging some woman there. Not just a friendly hug, either. They were engaged in a heated round of tonsil hockey. Is there something in the water? I wondered aloud. It was all I could think of to say as I saw Kat's relationship go down the drain, along with my marriage. Must be a cheating virus in the darn water, she snarled. I glanced at her, and the fire in her dark eyes made me nervous. And a female? That jerk. He said he doesn't even like females. I listened to her going off on him for about 20 minutes. Then she looked at me and broke down in tears of her own. I returned her favor from earlier, holding her as she let it all out. When she was all cried out, she looked at me with bloodshot eyes that pretty much mirrored my own. Look at us. Huh? Two of a kind. She laughed sadly, and I smiled as a few stray tears ran down my face too. Well, at least Maggie did it to me in private. I shrugged. That jerk did it on national television. I'm so sorry, Kat. Not your fault, hon. She hugged me tight, then reached for her cell phone. Excuse me while I call his cheating self and tell him what time it is. No problem. I nodded as she hit his speed dial button. Hey, Darius. Yep, we saw the game. Mac came over, since his cheating person wife is divorcing him, and kicked him out. No, he's going to be staying with me for a few days. Just until he can find his own place. No, and that brings me to why I'm calling you ... I saw you playing tonsil tag with that person. She stopped and listened for a few seconds, rolling her eyes. She silently placed her finger to her lips and hit speaker so I could listen in. I nodded in understanding. But baby, I'm just playing. I have needs, you know. She doesn't mean anything to me. I just need a little something on the side while I'm on the road. You gotta know that. Jerk was whining and wheedling. Fool didn't belong on the Dodgers now, as far as I was concerned. Well, Darius, we are done now, she said with determination in her voice. I'll have the stuff you left here sent back to your place in L.A. I don't want to see you, hear from you, or anything. Do you understand? But baby, he started, sounding desperate. No way. You lost the right to call me baby when you did that with that person on national television. I don't play that. We are done. D-O-N-E. Finished. F-I-N-I-S-H-E-D. Get that into your head right now. Goodbye, Darius. I hope the person was worth it. Before he could whine anymore, Kat ended the call and blocked his number. She looked at me and gave me a rueful smile. Well, that's that. Zero tolerance. I nodded. Zero tolerance. I agree, Kat. Cheaters don't deserve second chances. So what is she doing with the divorce? Don't even tell me she's going to take you to the cleaners. I swear, I'll smack the blonde off her head. Kat always got me going with her euphemisms, and I found myself grinning at that one. Strangely, no. She wants $2,200 a month in alimony, probably so I won't try to stand in the way of her getting remarried ASAP. But other than that, the settlement she's offering is very fair. I shrugged. I was all cried out and had come into the acceptance phase of divorce grief. Okay, acceptance was way off. I wanted to make them pay, and now that I was thinking clearly, my plan was coming into shape in my head. It would depend on a few things, like who was catering their wedding. But the more I went over it in my head, the better it felt. So she must be serious about the jerk. Did she tell you who it was? Kat asked. Yeah, and you're going to love this. Reginald Pennington IV, I smirked. Kat's eyes went wide. Shoot. I never would have taken Maggie for a gold digger. Neither would I, until now. She had everyone fooled, apparently. I shrugged. Her parents never liked me, so I'm pretty sure they pushed her into it, at least a little. I was never good enough for their little darling. Okay, I have to admit that I let my bitterness show through there for a moment. Well, forget them. Kat shrugged. I can see the wheels turning, Mac. What are you planning? Kat could always see when I was thinking really hard. She saw it often enough at work when I'd have to solve some problem in the shop or the factory. Revenge of monumental proportions. I smiled serenely as I told her, just trust me on this. It will make a lasting impression on them for the rest of their lives. Okay, I'm almost afraid to ask. What do you have so far? Kat was chuckling now. I laid out my basic plan for her, and she erupted into gut-busting laughter. You are one crazy person. She squealed as tears of laughter fell down her face. Okay, we need to figure out how to do this. So we did. We stayed up, drinking colas and hashing out our plan of action for when the wedding would take place. We figured that in 3 months, since I wasn't going to fight the divorce, that they'd get married 1 to 6 months after that. We'd be ready, and if I could remain friendly with Maggie, and yes, even with Reginald, I might be able to get into the wedding without crashing it. By the time I took my suitcase and bag into the guest room, it was well after midnight. I told Kat that I would be late into the shop, since I had to go see Tim to sign the separation papers in the morning, and she understood. She said she would keep everything going until I got there, or I could take the day off if I wanted. I slept surprisingly well that night. Maybe it was the soda, which we drunk in moderation, or maybe it was the twisted and insidious plan I had devised to make Reginald and Maggie's wedding a memorable experience for them. Either way, I was happy with what we'd figured out. I was up bright and early with a smile on my face. I heard the sounds of bacon and eggs sizzling on the stove, and the scent woke me up even more. She also had a fresh pot of coffee brewing, and that was even better. I couldn't remember the last time that Maggie had cooked me breakfast, but darn it. Kat was, and we were just temporary roommates. I showered and dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, since I didn't feel like going into the shop after seeing Tim. I then joined Kat in the kitchen. Good morning, Kat. I smiled as I sat down at the bar stool at her kitchen nook. Good morning, sunshine. She gave me a dazzling smile. You look a lot better this morning than when you got here last night. Thanks to you and soda. I nodded in appreciation, which got me a musical laugh. I had to laugh too, since Kat's laugh is infectious. Well, here's some eggs and bacon for you, Han. Are you coming in to work after you see Tim? She set down the plate and a mug of coffee in front of me. Thanks, Kat. Nah, I think I'm going to take the day off. I don't know how I'm going to react after meeting with Maggie and her lawyer for the signing. I shrugged. Tell you what, though, I'll take you to lunch later and let you know what happened. Kat nodded. You better, Mac. Shit. I'm glad I ain't going with you. If I saw that meanie, I'd probably have to smack her. That's one reason I love ya, sweetie. I grinned. You're the most loyal person I know. Abba WW, I love ya too, boss. She smiled sweetly as I stood up and gave me a hug. Kat's only 1 inch shorter than I am, so her entire body was pressed to mine as we embraced in a hug of commiseration. Hey, both of our exes were cheating. I'm glad you're coping too, I told her as I squeezed her close, then released her. At least they weren't cheating with each other. Now that would be a cliché. She snorted a laugh, and I had to chuckle at that one. True enough, but for both of us to find out on the same day, biggest coincidence ever. I gave her my best comic book guy impression. Kat and I both love The Simpsons, so she got it right away and gave me a snickering laugh with a slap on the shoulder. You're right, Mac. Damn big coincidence, which makes that cheating drug in the water sound even more plausible. You and your conspiracy theories. I rolled my eyes, giving her a mirthful smile. Hey, the truth is out there. Kat gave me a spooky look. When we'd finished cleaning up and loading her dishwasher, she handed me a key to her place. It was going to go to Darius, but I think you're going to need it more than he will. She smiled. Thanks, Kat. I smiled, hugging her tight. Don't worry, though. I'll find my own place in a few days and I'll be out of your hair. No rush, Mac, she assured me. Trust me, Han, I'd rather have you around where I can keep an eye on you than have you on your own where only God knows what you would do by yourself. My parents went through a separation, so I know how my daddy took it when Mama left him. I'm not letting you out of my sight. Okay, Mom. I smirked, and she swatted my shoulder with a cheeky smirk of her own. I'd heard about what had happened and how her mom was mentally off balance. She hadn't cheated on Kat's dad, but there were other issues with her personality and mental health that led her to alcohol and finally divorcing him. I didn't know all the details, but it wasn't as sordid as my own situation. However, her dad had taken it hard. For some background on our relationship, Kat and I had known each other for 20 years now. She's 2 years older than me, but kind of kept an eye on me in school when we were kids. Back then, I was smaller than all the other boys, so I got picked on a lot. Kat was taller than most of the boys and girls already, and was well on her way to Amazon status. She stood up for me, and nobody wanted to test her. But she wasn't just reactive in that regard. She taught me how to stand up for myself. She taught me how to fight dirty, since my own folks wouldn't do it. She'd learned young how to take care of herself. By the time we were teenagers, I had finally grown up enough that I was an inch taller than her. Barely. I hit my last growth spurt during my sophomore year of high school, and Kat had stopped growing by then. She's 6, and I'm 6'A, and that was where we've been ever since. We've both filled out since our beanpole days, but we're still in good shape. She was a hurdler on the track team, and I played baseball. But while Kat was good enough for a scholarship to USC, I wasn't quite good enough at baseball to warrant a scholarship. So instead, I joined the Army and then used my G.I. Bill to go to school afterward. When I'd started the chocolate shop just before marrying Maggie, Kat had applied for the job as manager. She had an MBA, so I snatched her up quickly. Our first year, I couldn't pay her very much, but once word of mouth spread, we had almost more business than we could handle. I managed to get some great people working for me, and Kat was and is the best of them. I left her in charge after a year in order to take Maggie on our belated honeymoon. Kat had kept everything running smooth as silk over that 2 weeks, and after the first year, we were well on our way to paying off the bank loan, and I could even afford to give everyone a nice raise. At the end of the 3rd year, my shop had a miniature factory attached to it with a sizable kitchen and everything. I secured some cocoa bean contracts and managed to bring in some nice exotic blends. During our 5th year, we were sending special orders of candy all throughout California, but I steadfastly refused to go franchise or anything like that. We became damn near special order only, though. I was offered millions for my company, but I and my employees refused to sell. They decided that they didn't want to work for anyone but me. If I had sold the shop, all my people would have quit. That decided it for me. I was going to keep it a small business with my 20 employees, and we were going to just have fun and make money while doing it. That, as it turned out, was the final nail in my coffin as far as my in-laws went. Maggie's father wanted to buy into my business and expand it. I politely but firmly shut him down, saying that I wanted to keep the business small with a family feel to it. He lit me up good, telling me that expansion was the only way to make serious money. I firmly and less politely pointed out that I was making some serious cash already, but that I didn't want to get greedy like him. I idly wondered what they would think of Maggie cheating on me with, then separating from me in favor of Reginald, and realized that I didn't care, but that they probably approved. Old money attracts old money, and the Sullivans, while not as affluent as the Penningtons, were still old money. Forget it. Kat and I left out that morning after breakfast. She went to work while I went to see Tim at his office. When I got there, Maggie hadn't shown up yet, so we chatted until she arrived. When she walked in, Tim visibly tensed. I could tell by his body language that Maggie and her lawyer weren't the only ones present. I stood and turned, and sure enough, there was little Dickie Pennington himself. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to wipe the self-satisfied smirk off his face. Instead, I ignored his offered handshake in favor of looking at Maggie. Well, let's get it over with, I shrugged. Tim went over the proposed split and everything. Since my business wasn't funded by her money or her family's money, and since the house was a gift from her folks since her grandparents died, those were not community property and were ours. My Mustang was mine, of course. I had been restoring it since high school. Tim surprised me. So you're separating from my client in order to marry Reginald Pennington IV. Is that correct, Mrs. McDougal? The question took her aback. Well, she hesitated. A simple yes or no will suffice, please. Tim wasn't letting up on her. Her lawyer, a Gloria Allred wannabe, leaned over and whispered something in Maggie's ear. Yes, she said softly, looking down as if ashamed. Tim never called her Mrs. McDougal. And how soon were you planning on the wedding? Tim continued. Now it was Maggie, Reggie Boy, and Gloria Jr. in the huddle. They were whispering fiercely back and forth. Tim took that opportunity to lean over and whisper in my ear spousal support. I just nodded back and smiled. He was trying to get me out of paying her a dime. When the three stooges broke their huddle, Maggie looked at Tim again. As soon as possible after the separation is final. We've already planned most of the wedding itself. Tim nodded. And if these reports are correct, he pulled out a detailed financial report on Reggie Boy. Mr. Pennington here is, on his own and without the multiple homes and cars he owns, solvent for nearly $1 billion. My question, Mrs. McDougal, is why do you want an honest, hard-working man like your husband to pay you a dime in spousal support when you can just ask Mr. Pennington here for any money you wish to spend? Maggie once again got drawn into a huddle with Gloria Jr. and El Culo. Tim sent me a lightning-fast grin, and I answered back with a grin of my own while the three amigos debated their next move. When they came out of the huddle, Gloria Jr. spoke up. What would you suggest as adequate compensation, then? She asked, her stern look centered on me. Well, she can have all the furniture, not just her half. I don't care about that, I shrugged. Once more into the huddle, dear friends. The whispers were more subdued this time, but finally they broke and looked at Tim. Agreed, the attorney said. And so it went. I didn't have to pay any money, but I didn't get any of the furniture either. Gloria Jr. made the necessary changes to the divorce papers we all signed, except for Snake Boy, and the filing took place that very day as soon as the lawyer left. As I was heading back to my car, Maggie and the jerk came up to me. Angus, old boy, I hope there are no hard feelings. Once again, he actually stuck his hand out for me to shake. That did it. I took his hand and squeezed extremely hard so that his face contorted in pain. Call me Angus again, Reginald, and I will make your life a living nightmare. To you, I'm Mr. McDougal. Get it? By the time I was done talking, he was on his knees and the bones in his hand were scraping together. Why, yes, Mr. McDougal. Let me go P-L-E. P-L, please. His face had real fear on it. I released his hand before it could get worse, and he breathed a sigh of relief. That was for calling me Angus, I said evenly. As far as the slut goes, no hard feelings. I smiled, turned, and walked towards my car. I felt good, now. I somehow got out of paying any money and was basically free and clear of her as soon as the divorce was final. Oh, that reminded me. I walked back toward them as Maggie was helping to his feet. Maggie, before I go, I need my grandma's engagement ring back. I held out my hand. Maggie looked at me like I had just fallen off another planet. Then she took it and the wedding ring off and handed them both to me. Thanks. I smiled, nodding to them as I pocketed both rings and walked back to my car. I revved up the powerful car engine and shifted it into gear as I sped off. The car screeched its tires as I left the parking lot, leaving behind a bit of rubber on the road. It wasn't something I did often, but I wanted to send a loud and clear message to the two lovebirds. I looked in my rearview mirror, and the jerk was standing there dumbfounded, still clutching his right hand gingerly. I smirked happily as I drove towards the shop. When I got there, Kat was happy to see me, as was everyone else. They all came up and hugged me or shook my hand and told me how sorry they were. I thanked them all and told them to get back to work. However, I said it with a smile on my face, so they knew I appreciated their efforts to help me feel better. The thing was, I was feeling pretty darn good already. Besides the lawyer fees and half the court costs, and having to give up my half of furniture I never really liked anyway, I had just managed to pull off a peaceful divorce. "See Ma and Kat," I said. "Let's go to lunch." I drove us there in Bullet, and Kat loved riding in it. She could hear the rumbling of the engine under the hood and feel the power radiate from it like an aura of awesomeness. We ate and laughed, two old friends sharing our meal and our friendship, and a new solidifying bond of recently betrayed love. I still can't believe I had absolutely no clue that she was cheating on me. I hissed finally, giving voice to my own haplessness when it came to being blind as far as Maggie had been concerned. I must have really been stupid. "No, Mac, you were in love. Love can blind us, yeah, no." Kat smiled and reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I smiled in spite of myself. "Thanks, Kat." I squeezed her hand back, letting her know how much I appreciated all she did for me, professionally and personally. She was way more than my office manager and friend. I'd come to depend on her for a long time now. First in school when I was the little kid who was smaller than everyone else. Then as the man who wanted his business to succeed and had hired her as the most eligible and best qualified of the bunch of applicants who had applied. "You never have to thank me, Mac. A nice bonus at the end of the year is thanks enough." She grinned, and I laughed outright at that. "Consider it done." I smiled and gazed into her dark brown eyes with my dark blue orbs. She looked away first, and I noticed a slight flush on her caramel-colored face. It took me aback, but I recovered quickly even as I felt myself becoming excited. I told myself to stop it. She's my friend, and she had just suffered a loss too. In all our years as friends, I had never looked at Kat that way before. Never in my life had I seen her as anything but a friend, albeit a very beautiful friend. Sure, I noticed the fact that she's a very well put together woman, as I did the previous night at her house when I'd pulled in and she'd come outside to meet me. Hell, what red-blooded American male wouldn't notice a gorgeous Amazon like her? But that was just something us guys do. This felt different. I realized that I wasn't ready for this, and quickly we got back to other topics. After we'd finished lunch, I drove her back to the shop and dropped her off. She said she'd see me at home, so I drove up to the bluffs and looked out over the Pacific. I looked down at my left hand and removed my ring that had sat there for the last 8 years. I reached in my pocket and pulled out Maggie's wedding band too. I studied them both, and just the sight of them made me sick. I then pulled out my grandma's engagement ring and held all 3 of them together. I put the engagement ring back into my pocket, then hauled back and threw the wedding bands out into the ocean as hard as possible. They glistened in the sun as they went over the bluffs and into the crashing waves. It was symbolic to me. My marriage was dead, and that was the final farewell. Sure, the divorce still had to play itself out, but this was what I had to do for my own sanity and to be able to move on. Now, just because I'd said goodbye to my marriage didn't mean that I had given up on my plan to get revenge on Maggie and Reggie Boy. I thought of the line from the song Violence and Bloodshed that went, "Payback's a jerk, and I'm paying all." I smiled as I could hear Scott Columbus on the drums of death, and Eric Adams belting out the lyrics while Joey DeMaio laid down the bass line, and Ross the Boss scorched the lead guitar. Oh yes, Reggie was going to pay for stealing my wife, and my wife was going to pay for being a gold digger. Some would call me vindictive and a caveman. To those I would just say, to heck with you. Do a 20-mile road march in my boots, then judge me. 3 months later, it was all settled. Joint accounts were split 50/50. During that time, Kat and I coexisted as roommates and got along great. Nobody cared at work that we were living together. The huge surprise was when we got home one night and found the wedding invitations in the mail. Maggie hadn't been kidding. They had the wedding scheduled a month from the formal divorce decree. I grinned at Kat, and she grinned back. "Okay, now it's go time," I said mischievously as I drove us to Costco. Finding out the caterer for the wedding was easy. He'd wanted to do business with us a few months back, but it had fallen through. I decided to ... give him another chance and do negotiate it all out myself, this time around. What got me laughing a lot was that Maggie was going to wear white, as was Reggie Boy in his navy dress whites. He'd been a naval aviator back during the early days of the war, while I'd been in Captain Drake's Alpha team. The dump truck couldn't even wear a normal black tux, it seemed. I paid a visit to the caterer a few nights before the wedding and replaced the chocolate cake mix with my own special blend. I grinned like a Cheshire cat as I replaced the cake mix with a chocolate tasting something extra. No, it wasn't poison. It was just something that would make Maggie and Reggie Boy's wedding pretty darn unforgettable for everyone involved. Now, what I was doing could be compared to a high school prank, only done with a lot more style. But dang it, I had to get some back. They'd made fun of me for 8 months before blindsiding me with the divorce papers. Granted, she had been very nice in the divorce, and I was left with just a broken heart. However, that broken heart was going to cost them. I kept Kat informed of what was going on, and she laughed hard when I told her that Operation Mudflap was a go. The invitation included the reception, which was where the real entertainment would begin. The morning of the wedding, Kat and I showered simultaneously, and no, we didn't shower together, although in the past several months we had grown closer. We were, however, still cautious about relationships, and I for one was worried about ruining our friendship by taking it to the next level. I'm just glad that she had those tankless water heaters installed. When I was dressed in my suit, I waited in the living room until Kat was ready. "Well, am I presentable?" she asked as I was watching a UCLA football game. I turned to look at her, and my jaw hit the floor. Before me was a sight that would be difficult to describe, but I'll try anyway. Kat was wearing an emerald green dress that hugged her curves like a glove. The shimmery material clung to her as if it was in love with her body and didn't want to be separated from it. Her hair was done in a shoulder-length style that framed her lovely face perfectly. Her full lips were painted a rich red, and her green eyeshadow complemented her dress perfectly. She wore 1-inch heels, which put her at the exact same height as me. Her toned legs were on display, and the heels showed them off perfectly. Her generous bust was barely restrained by the top of her dress, and as she twirled around, I caught a glimpse of her caramel-colored back. "Goodness, you look amazing," I said when I was finally able to form coherent words. She grinned a perfect smile. "Thanks, Mac. You look pretty awesome yourself." I blushed at that one. "Thanks, Kat," I said as we headed out the door. We drove to the church. Ironically enough, Billy Idol's White Wedding was playing on the radio. As Bullet pulled into the parking lot, people turned and stared as the big V8 announced our arrival. Every guest there besides us was upper-crust old money. Okay, this was going to be even more fun than I'd anticipated. We showed our invitations to the security guard at the door. Okay, security guard might be too generous of a term. He looked to be one of Reggie Boy's security goons that accompanied him to public events. It seems that the Penningtons have made some enemies over the years with their business practices, thereby making the security necessary. That didn't surprise me in the least. Reggie Boy's family is of the school of do unto others before they do it to you, their version of the golden rule. Or it could be he who hath the gold, maketh the rules. And from the looks of disdain that Kat and I were getting from the snobbish elite, I felt even better about what was going to happen this fine day. As we took our seats in the pew, I leaned over to Kat and whispered in her ear, "Remember not to eat anything chocolate at the reception." She gave me a soft giggle at that and hugged me quickly. The service was long and boring, typical Catholic wedding. I had to fight several times to keep from falling asleep, but whatever. Reggie looked admittedly dashing in his Navy uniform. Another reason to dislike him. He had been a Navy officer before resigning his commission to go into business with his family. His Annapolis-class ring glinted and gleamed as he waited for Maggie to walk down the aisle. Then the wedding march began to play, and here she came, her snobby father by her side. I remembered our wedding and how he'd been scowling at me the entire time. Now, however, he was beaming with pride that his darling little girl was finally marrying someone of her own station. I wanted to punch him in the face, but refrained. All would be paid in full at the reception. So it went. I won an award for Best Actor when I congratulated the both of them as we got to the reception. Kat would have won for Best Actress, since she had taken Maggie's betrayal of me as a betrayal of everyone who worked for me and had loved her like a sister, too. Reggie rubbed it in my face with another Angus, "Old boy, I hope there really are no hard feelings. The better man won out in the end. It took every bit of self-control I had not to punch him in the face, wreck his body, elbows, knees, and make his plastic surgeon a very rich person with a full-face workup. Instead, I said, "You're right. The better man did win." After which I grabbed a mildly surprised Kat and hugged her with everything I had. Kat froze for an instant, then returned my hug with enthusiasm. Right there in front of Reggie and Maggie, I claimed Kat. That first hug was amazing. Everything around us disappeared for a moment. As we broke the hug, Kat looked at Reggie and Maggie. Yeah, the best man really did win. She winked and left the happy couple standing there with their mouths hanging open. We shared a grin as we took our assigned places, and we had some lobster for dinner. It was actually delicious. Then it was time for the real entertainment as the wedding cake was wheeled out. Reggie and Maggie did the ceremonial cutting of the cake, and the ceremonial cake and face for both of them. Everyone laughed, and people went up to get a piece of cake for themselves. We decided to wait for the end of the line, since it was going to be one hell of a show. Sure enough, as soon as we got to the cake itself, chaos started breaking loose. It started with a fart from the bride, of all people. Not just a soft fart either. The ripper could be heard from across the dining hall. It was followed by a resounding fart from the groom himself. I glanced in their direction and said, "You're excused," in a loud voice which caused some chuckles from the snobbish elite around me. Oh, they weren't going to be spared, however. Then Maggie got a surprised look on her face as a gurgling sound escaped from her, followed quickly by an expression of pure horror. Reginald's face scrunched up as he smelled something foul, then let loose with his own gurgling sound from his behind. They looked at each other in horror as more farts and gurgles were heard from the rest of the guests. Maggie and Reggie Boy were up and running as quickly as they could. Both were making a mad dash for the restrooms, and were soon followed by more guests as they realized that they had just messed themselves. Kat and I left quickly and quietly, and were sitting in Bullet when we couldn't hold our laughter anymore. We both had tears streaming down our faces as we damn near busted our guts laughing so hard. "Oh my God, Mac," Kat laughed, then held her stomach as she guffawed. I was laughing just as hard as she was. "Do you think I used too much?" I said between tear-filled bouts of laughter. "How fast does that stuff work?" She laughed again. "Well, the boxes at Costco said it worked well, but not to use too much of it." I snickered as our laughter finally died down a bit. "How many boxes did you pour into the cake mix?" she asked incredulously. "All of them." I smiled serenely, causing Kat to just about die laughing again. I'd used a powdered chocolate-flavored laxative and poured it into the boxes of cake mix that the caterers had set aside for the Pennington wedding. The cake and cupcakes were almost pure laxative, since I dumped out most of the cake mix boxes and replaced them with the powdered laxative. I'd also poured some in with the regular cake mix so that it wouldn't be too strong. But wow, I didn't expect it to work that fast. That was just the icing on the cake, hey ha ha. The night I'd gone to the caterer, it was ostensibly to work out a contract with him for the chocolate my factory made. He'd contacted me a few months prior, and I'd promised to get back to him. I told him that we'd been a little backlogged due to several of my team members getting sick, but once we were back up and running, I was able to take some samples to him. He had a greedy look in his eyes as he thought I was going to give him what he wanted. When he'd given me a tour of the place, he showed me the kitchen and had even pointed out that they were catering the Pennington wedding. I'd already known, of course, but he didn't know that the bride was my cheating gold-digging ex-wife. I played nice, then as soon as he told his people to knock off for the day, he went back to his office after shaking my hand. He said he would get the paperwork drawn up for the contract and would let me and Tim know when it was finished. However, I think he must have forgotten all about that contract in the days that followed the wedding itself. As soon as everyone was gone, and I left his office, I made for the back door to the kitchen, propped it open, then drove my car around. I switched out the powdered cake mix for the powdered chocolate laxative and left. I made sure the door to the kitchen latched and made sure that I didn't leave any boxes that I'd brought with me behind. One thing Captain Drake had taught us back when I was in the service was to never leave a trace behind. He's a good guy. Last I heard, he'd resigned his commission and was now a history professor at UCLA. By the day of the wedding, all the evidence was gone. Nothing could tie me to the super lax cake. Only Kat and I knew of the plan, and she wasn't talking. When Kat and I made it back to our place, she looked at me seriously. "Mac, that hug earlier." She started. "Kat, I know I was out of line, but you look so beautiful, and I couldn't help myself." I blurted. She put a finger to my lips. As we came down from the latest round of laughter, I pulled Kat to me and gave her a quick hug. I felt a surge of excitement and Kat noticed. "Wow, you're feeling it again already," she exclaimed, giving me a playful nudge. "You have that effect on me." I shrugged. "Must be something special," she remarked. "Well, maybe, but if it is, I'm pretty sure it's permanent." I agreed as I leaned in for another hug. This time we took our time, savoring each moment. We spent the entire rest of the day and night enjoying each other's company. We took a shower, then cuddled in bed. Afterward, she playfully claimed me as her own, saying, "You're mine." She then smiled. Now, some may ask why I set up the caterer the way I did. The problem was that Sal, the owner, had made inappropriate advances towards Kat when she'd first gone to negotiate with him, back when he'd shown interest in doing business with us. After standing up for herself and rejecting his advances, she came back and suggested that we should not work with him. What changed was when they were announced as the caterers for the Pennington wedding, and I saw the opportunity to expose his unprofessional behavior. The aftermath of the Brown wedding, as the press called it, was immediate. The news channels and newspapers covered the event the next day, showing photos and videos of the bride, groom, and guests rushing to the toilets off the dining hall. I had all our friends from the shop over at Kat's house to watch the chaos unfold. None of the footage showed us, but everyone knew we had been present. We all laughed so hard that tears streamed down our faces as we watched the snobbish elite desperately trying to avoid an embarrassing situation. The only people I felt sorry for were the janitors who had to clean up the mess afterwards. Of course, about a week after the wedding disaster, the police came around asking questions. Kat and I had attended the wedding, but we both claimed that we had left when everything started to go wrong, as we were concerned about our own well-being. We managed to keep straight faces during our interviews and couldn't help but burst into laughter after the detectives left. We never heard from them again. Reggie Boy filed a lawsuit against the caterer, but Sal decided to flee the country rather than pay the settlement. Last we heard, he had gone back to Italy, where he was from. Not sure what happened to him after that. Reginald Pennington IV was discovered in a compromising situation with another man's wife less than a year after the wedding. Who caught him? Her husband, and he was not very forgiving. He called up Maggie, and she had some choice words for Reginald when she arrived at the offended husband's house. Maggie showed up on our doorstep shortly after. At least Reginald ended up losing a testicle during the altercation. It turned out that while she had no issue with cheating herself, she absolutely couldn't stand for her husband to cheat on her. Kind of a double standard, don't you think? Yes, Kat and I moved into a larger place, since her little 2-bedroom apartment wasn't quite big enough. We found a 4-bedroom ranch-style house as our new home, and I had it halfway paid off within the first year. It turned out that Reggie Boy had made Maggie sign a prenuptial agreement stating that if she filed for divorce for any reason, she would leave with nothing but what she had brought into the marriage. She still had her decent-paying job, but that was it. No massive fortune for Maggie Sullivan. It was late the following year when we heard a knock on the door. Kat was 4 months pregnant, so I quickly hugged her and went to answer it myself. I opened the door to a tearful Maggie. "What do you want, Maggie?" I asked in a neutral tone. "I'm sorry, Mac. So sorry for everything," she sobbed. "Hey, you were the one who wanted someone better," I shrugged. "What happened? I caught Reginald cheating on me," she admitted, her sobs intensifying. "Wow. Tough break," I said with a touch of sarcasm. "Mac, I'm really sorry. I was wondering if there might be any chance." She trailed off as she noticed a pregnant Kat standing behind me. "Baby, who is it?" I heard Kat ask as she joined me at the door. She gave Maggie a kind smile. "It's Maggie," and she was just leaving. I stated before closing the door firmly in my ex's face. I bolted the door and took Kat in my arms. "She's the past. You're my future. I love you, sweetheart. I'll love you, sweetheart. I'll love you too, baby," she replied as she hugged me. Kat and I had a private wedding soon after we found out she was pregnant. It was a small ceremony at the courthouse, her idea actually, and we became husband and wife. She still manages the shop, and she's still one of my closest friends. I love my wife. The end.